So for today's session, and if you go 2 slides down, inshallah. One more. Yep. So, we already had our first session, and I know we do have some new attendees from last week. If you have not, got a chance to watch the first session, the recording is on Google Classroom. So we do encourage you all to go ahead and, reach out. And I believe the password and everything is already there to watch the first session. As far as today is concerned, we'll be discussing what is Usul al-Fiqh Part 2. That aspect will mostly be on the definition of Usul al-Fiqh itself and some of its prominent characteristics that make it a unique science. So today's speaker, inshallah, is Brother Iyad Hilal. Ustad Iyad Hilal holds a master's in Islamic jurisprudence and Islamic legal theory, so both fiqh and usul al-fiqh. He has taught and written on various issues related to Islamic law and usul al-fiqh over a period of 30 years. He has authored several texts, most notably Studies in Usul al-Fiqh, which is a short English text on the science of Usul al-Fiqh. He's also written an Arabic text, Al-Muahadat al-Dawliya fi al-Sharia al-Islamiyya, or International Treaties in Islamic Law. Most currently, he's working on publishing the 4th edition of Studies in Usul al-Fiqh and Ibhath fi Sunnah Nabawiyya, which is an Arabic text on selected themes in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Additional lectures, khutbahs, and just reminders can be found on Al-Arqam's Facebook as well as YouTube page. So if you do have the chance, please do check that out, inshallah. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Ustad Iyad, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, let's pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will uplift this pandemic and this trial. We are still going through this, and we were hoping that to have this class physical in some place, and then it can be streamed through the internet, but due to the current situation, it was decided to go through this, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. So please bear with us. And if you have anything, as the brother mentioned, you can send the questions and follow up in the Google class. Now, like the brother mentioned, last week was talking about fiqh, sharia, law, and this week we'll talk about usul al-fiqh. But some of those maybe who attended this week, they missed last week. They can go either through the registration, the recording of last week, and can go through this. We'll go through a general introduction. We'll go through general recap of some definitions. We mentioned last week, Brother Muhammad Hanini brought a few definitions for fiqh linguistically, and as it was used in the early stages, as an example in the days of Abu Hanifa, radiallahu anhu, and then later on as a term. So now when we talk about fiqh, we talk about it as a term. As a term, it had been defined different ways, very much similar to each other, one of which is the one which you will see in the screen, the definition of al-Amidi. For those who would like to review al-Amidi, Al-Amidi now, alhamdulillah, is translated. It had been translated by Dr. Bernard Weiss, Searching for the God's Fall. So it is العلم الحاصل بجملة من الأحكام الشرعية الفروعية بالنظر والاستدلال. The knowledge, or the knowledge of body of revealed detailed rules extracted through inference and reasoning. You'll see some slight difference in words here and there, but in general, all definitions agree on this. You have to have knowledge of a set of rules, أحكام شرعية, the detailed rules related to our actions and by their evidences. So just memorizing a book of fiqh without any evidences does not make the person faqih. You got to be familiar with the fiqh, with the rules and with their evidences. And Sharia, it had been defined in different ways, but all of them are the same. This is Ibn Taymiyyah's. We talked about Nawawi. Now we'll talk about Sheikh Mustafa Zarqa. All of them, when they talk about the definition of Sharia, this is what it says. كل ما شرعه الله من العقائد والأعمال. All that which Allah commanded of beliefs and actions. And then, is there any difference between them? There are some people who differentiated between fiqh and sharia, but I didn't see valid basis for the differentiation. Because if we agree that the sharia is whatever God commanded of beliefs and actions, including Sheikh Mustafa Zarqa rahimahullah, he says الشريعة الإسلامية هي مجموعة الأوامر والأحكام الاعتقادية والعملية التي يوجب الإسلام تطبيقها لتحقيق أهدافه الإصلاحية في المجتمع. The Sharia Islamiyya is the set of commandments and rules related to i'tiqad and actions. I'tiqad is the aqidah, actions is the fiqh, that Islam meant it to be observed and implemented in order to achieve its objectives in creating the reform in the society. So having said that, it's very much similar. But to be more particular, if we look at the whole body as Sharia, as you see in this, Sharia includes the aqidah, the morals, the information, they talk about anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. If He wants from us to think, walk and then look, this is part of Sharia. But also it includes, Sharia includes this specific set of rulings, which is fiqh. So fiqh is part of Sharia. Sharia is more general than fiqh. There are some people who say that the Sharia is the basic rules, general rules mentioned in Quran, but you have in Quran general rules and you have specific rules. As an example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to establish the adl. This is general. Yeah, it is Sharia. But what about the rules of inheritance? Rules of inheritance are mentioned in Quran and they are not general. They are very specific. So you cannot have that as criteria to differentiate between fiqh and Sharia. Some people would tell you that Sharia is from God and the fiqh.
It looks like your camera did go off, so if you could just turn it back on, Brother Iyad, it would be appreciated. There we go.
And the Sharia, so the Sharia is the fiqh is all of those rules, which is part of the Sharia. So to say that the Sharia is just the general rules and the fiqh are the details, and the Sharia is from Quran and the fiqh is in the Sunnah, that doesn't hold water. To say that the Sharia is from God and the fiqh is the jurist's elaboration, the jurist's elaboration are not based on their own whims and desires. They are elaborating, like you see in the types of fiqh, on probable evidences. So the evidence either can be qat'i or conclusive, or can be dhanni, probable. So, and it can be explicit and it can be deduced. So the one who will exercise this to understand the probable text and to deduce rules from the text is the jurist. And Sharia is not abstract. It needs also the jurist to understand it. Either understand the conclusive or understand the probable. Both need understanding. And both were taught to us by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Having said that, let's move to the definition of usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is an Arabic term. By the way, if we read any classical book in usul al-fiqh, first of all, they will talk about definitions, how to define the term, this discipline. And they start with defining fiqh and usul al-fiqh. And then they move to talk about some other issues related to usul al-fiqh. In general, like the sources of usul al-fiqh, the subject matter of usul al-fiqh, the objective of usul al-fiqh. All of this will be addressed in the introduction before moving to the subject matter of usul al-fiqh. So we'll try our best to catch up with all of this. Usul al-fiqh is Arabic term. It is either consists of two words. Usul, which is the plural of asl, basis or foundation, and fiqh, which we talked about before last week. So the usul al-fiqh basically is the foundation of fiqh. As simple as this. But when we say the foundation of fiqh as a term, it refers to what? What do we mean by saying the foundation of fiqh? As a term, it refers to the study of the origins, the sources, the extraction of the Islamic jurisprudence. Or in other words, actually the legal theory. If we said that the fiqh is the law, then usul fiqh is the theory of this law, of the Islamic law. So it addresses sources of Sharia. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, any source the jurist views as a source, whether all of them agreed on or whether there is some debate. But for each mujtahid, the mujtahid adopts certain sources of Sharia. Then how to utilize these sources, how to understand them, is through certain linguistic canons or tools. And then the outcome will be the hukum shar'i, the fruit. And who will benefit from usul al-fiqh? Whether the mujtahid or the muqallid, the one who exercises the ijtihad, the process of extracting rules from the sources, or the one who is just following another mujtahid. So these are actually the four main, according to al-Ghazali, definition poles. He says al-Aqtab al-Arba'. The first qutub, the first pole is the adilla, the sources. The second qutub, or the second pole, is how tariqatul istinbat, the way of extracting rules. And then the third pole or qutub is the hukum, or he calls it thamara, the fruit, because number one and number two leads to number three. And then the beneficiary, the one who will take the fruit. Either he'll be a mujtahid or she'll be a mujtahid, or they'll be muqallid. So it refers to the methodology to derive rules from the Islamic legislative sources. This one this diagram gives us the place of usul fiqh in Islam in general. You have the sources, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, etc. You have the knowledge of the situation at hand. You have the knowledge of usul fiqh. You have the knowledge of Arabic language. All of this leads to ijtihad. And ijtihad, of course, leads to the fiqh. Fiqh, we listed here just some aspects of it: worship, economics, foreign relations, family law, food and drink, dress code, transactions, penal code. All of this is under the body of fiqh, which is the product or the thamara of the ijtihad, which is to put all of this above in consideration and to exercise it. And then comes the implementation. The fiqh can be implemented at different levels, and individuals level and the government level. Individuals level, even by each individual or by a group. So when someone wants to pray or to eat or to drink, this is individual. When two people want to conclude a transaction like selling or buying, then it's still intra-individual, which is part of the individual. Now, there are some other rules related to the political system, to the judiciary, to the government, to the state, or to the caliphate. Now, we cannot, as individuals, go to the other sphere and say, I want to implement the Sharia rules related to the government on my own. As an example, penal code is not of the responsibility of the individuals, but rather it is the responsibility of the legal system and the judiciary and the government. International relations, part of the government work. Any issue related to jihad, the government work. No individual, no group has the authority whatsoever to say, I want to carry the jihad. You don't have Shari'i capacity to do so, because you are getting into the other side. Imam al-Qurtubi, in his tafsir of even the qasas, there is ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. And you have in the qasas a life for you. The qisas is to apply certain rules regarding first-degree murder. First-degree murder, there is certain way to prove it, and there is certain way to apply the punishment. And the punishment can be applied, of course, and it should be applied by the government. He says, Qurtubi says, this ayah by itself means that there has to be an Imam al-A'zam, the Grand Imam, so in order to apply it. So I cannot go ahead and do it on my own. If I see someone steal something, I cannot go ahead and cut his hand or her hand. If I see someone committed zina, I cannot go and blast them. It's not my authority. So the application or the implementation of Sharia will be under at different levels, and we as individuals cannot get into the jurisdiction of the government. Imam al-Qarrafi actually wrote excellent book about this, al-Furuq, the criteria in differentiating between the actions of the Prophet ﷺ as a prophet, as a person who conveys the message, as imam, as leader, as qadi, as neighbor, different capacities. And he said if he acted in a certain area as a judge, only the judges are allowed to follow that and implement that. If he carries out certain action as a legal leader, as a leader of the community, only the leader can do that. So now here we have the general scheme of Islam, and you can see that Usul al-Fiqh deals with the upper part that leads to the fiqh. So utilizing Usul al-Fiqh while knowing the situation at hand, and using Usul al-Fiqh and using Arabic language postulates or tools in order to get ijtihad process in order to reach to the fiqh. That will be implemented. Now, if we move to the components of the Islamic legal system, like it has been said before, any legal system must have certain components, must have defined sources, must have method of interpretation, means of implementation, and objectives. يعني الشيخ مصطفى الزرقاء رحمه الله, when he defined the Sharia, let's go back to his definition, مجموعة الأوامر والأحكام الاعتقادية والعملية, set of rules التي يوجب الإسلام, which means rules that are defined by those sources, because it is Islam, it's not any other source. تطبيقها, means of implementation, to achieve its objectives. So you have, for the legal system, you have the sources and you have the method of interpretation. It can be method or methods, which is usul fiqh. You have the means of implementation, fiqh, and how to implement fiqh, like I mentioned in the previous slide, and the objectives. What does Islam want to achieve in the society? What are the sources for the legal system? How to interpret the law? How to implement the law? Without any of those four, the system cannot be a legal system. It applies to the common law, it applies to the positive law, it applies to the civil law, whether it's in France, whether it's in Britain, whether it's in the United States or Louisiana or Quebec in Canada. Any civil, any system of law has those four elements. Now, Islamic legal system, does it have those four elements? Yes, it has. Islam defined the Shari'i sources. You have methods of interpretation in usul fiqh. You have means of interpretation of fiqh, and you have the objective. So any try, any attempt to marginalize usul al-fiqh simply means we are denying the Islamic legal system as a legal system one of its most important components. Without it, it can't be a system. If you just have the sources, Quran and Sunnah, and we understand them the way we want and implement it the way we want to achieve this, it's not a system at all. So we have to have those four components so for the system to be a legal system. Again, if there is any question, please, you can send the questions to the sister you informed about. Now, we know now what is fiqh and what is usul fiqh. What's the difference between them? Fiqh is the fruit, according to Imam al-Ghazali, the end product of usul fiqh. So usul fiqh leads to the fiqh. But there are some differences. The fiqh is concerned with the detailed rules. As you remember, when we define فقه العلم بالأحكام الشرعية المستنبطة من أدلتها التفصيلية, having the knowledge of the شرعي rules that are derived or deduced from their detailed evidences. So the fiqh is concerned about the detailed rules and about the detailed evidences. Usul fiqh is concerned with the method of the deduction of such rules. And fiqh is concerned, like we said, with detailed evidences. One single ayah, one single hadith, or two ayahs or two hadiths. But usul fiqh is concerned with the general sources. Adilla ijmaliyya. So you have adilla tafsiriyya and adilla ijmaliyya. What is the difference between them? Those are two Arabic terms. Adilla ijmaliyya are the general evidences. So when we say Quran as a whole, it is part of adilla ijmaliyya, general evidence. When we say particular ayah, that talks about fits under detailed evidence. Faqih is concerned with the detailed evidences. Usul fiqh is concerned with the general evidences, with the sources. Okay. The usul fiqh defines for the expert, the legal expert, okay, you are allowed to resort to these sources. Those are our sources for the law. Quran, in general. Faqih will go to a particular evidence or particular hadith. So he will tell us cheating is not allowed. What's your evidence for this? That cheating is prohibited. That Rasulullah said, Man ghashya laysa minna. He who cheats, he doesn't belong to us. This is detailed evidence. The faqih will tell us establishing the prayer is a must. What's your evidence? The ayah. So they are talking about detailed evidences. But this ayah and this hadith, where did they come from? They came from major two sources, Quran and Sunnah. So those are adilla ijmaliyya. Just to elaborate a little bit more on this, when we say two sources, Quran and Sunnah, actually they go to one main source, which is the revelation, the wahy. Because some of those who reject the Sunnah, they claim that you are introducing Sunnah as another source in addition to Quran, while our source should be one. Yes, our source is one, wahy, the revelation. The source is the revelation, whatever God revealed to his prophet. But it was revealed in two forms. One form is Quran, which is carried to us through a certain way, which people memorize, and which can is, you know, as it had been defined in the Mus'haf, the 114 surahs in the Mus'haf, and the whatever revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he expressed it in his traditions, and his actions, and on his approvals. So both of them are go to one category, which is al-wahy. There are differences between them, but they depend on each other. The Quran is explained through the Sunnah. The Sunnah is bayan, explain Quran, and which we'll talk about the relationship between Quran and Sunnah. And the Quran establishes the authority of the Sunnah. So the Usul Fiqh deals with the major sources, with the general sources, with the Adilla Ijmaliyya, with the holistic sources, and the Faqih deals with the Adilla Tafsiliyya, with the detailed sources. Fiqh, final difference, Fiqh is the law itself. And Usul Fiqh is the methodology of how to extract the law, or the theory of the law. Those are major differences in between Fiqh and between Usul al-Fiqh. We have here the objectives of Usul al-Fiqh. But before we go to the objectives of Usul al-Fiqh, before we go through to the objectives of Usul Fiqh, this Usul Fiqh, what are its sources? Where did we take them from? مستمداته, as it had been said. مستمدات Usul Fiqh are, number one, the Arabic language. You have this is general, this is particular, this is qualified, this is not qualified. Arabic grammar, Arabic morphology. This is one source. And the second source, the revelation itself, the wahi. And another source, usul al-din, or ilm al-kalam. So usul fiqh is a blend of all of this. Language, revelation itself, and we'll see it when we talk about the development of usul al-fiqh, how did it materialize, and ilm al-kalam, or the theology, or usul al-din. Now, we said one of its sources is Arabic language. A person would ask, do we need Arabic language in usul fiqh? Actually, this course is not meant to talk about the details of usul fiqh. It's just meant, like it says, introduction to usul fiqh. Gives us some outline for usul fiqh. But if you want to study the rules of usul fiqh by themselves, you need Arabic. You cannot study it without Arabic. Actually, Arabic language cannot be underestimated at all. Not at all. It is a must if we want to understand the application of usul al-fiqh. And usul al-fiqh is needed, as we'll see. So a person would say we can translate. Yes, we can translate. But for you, if you want to look at this ayah and tell us which word is general, which word is particular, you cannot do this unless if you are equipped with Arabic language. The translator translated his view. So you are dealing with, or her view, we are dealing with second source. But if you want to deal directly with the text, you need the Arabic language. So these are the sources of usul al-fiqh. And this is the difference between fiqh and usul al-fiqh. Now, what are the objectives of usul al-fiqh? In general, to regulate ijtihad, to define ijtihad, and to guide the jurists in their effort of deducing the laws from the sources. That's the point. Defining ijtihad. Ijtihad is the process of understanding the text in order to relate it to a certain situation, or to derive rule from such source. So this process is regulated through usul al-fiqh. Without usul al-fiqh, this process will be haphazard. So it helps the jurists to get good knowledge of the sources of Sharia, methods of juristic deduction, methods to compare the strength of the ijtihad, the correctness of the evidence compared to another ijtihad, to another evidence, assessing the validity of the ijtihad, providing rationale for the Islamic legal theory. Actually, Dr. Majid Khabdouri, in his translation of Risala Imam Shafi'i, this is another important book of fiqh had been translated. So now we have a Risala by Majid Khabdouri, and you have Al-Ahkam by Imam al-Amidi, translated by Bernard Weiss. So those who want to, and both of them Shafi'i, because al-Amidi is Shafi'i jurist. So you can read this, you can read that, both of them are available, I think. So he says, and we'll talk about it about this more, and we'll talk about the development of usul fiqh and the role of Imam Shafi'i in the usul. He said Imam Shafi'i provided rationale for the Islamic legal order. He said before that, jurists used to derive rules, used to quote this evidence or that evidence, but they practice this by nature. They, as we'll see in the development of usul fiqh, the Sahaba did it from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, moved it to the Tabi'in, moved it to Tabi'in, and so on. So when the jurists came, Abu Hanifa was from the Tabi'in, radiallahu anhu. So he started exercising ijtihad, but he didn't tell us the frame. When Imam Shafi'i came after Imam Abu Hanifa. He didn't just provide us with rules, with law, but Imam Shafi'i defined certain frame. This frame is what Khabdouri called the rationale for the legal order. And what about the fiqh itself also. It gives us background. How did the fiqh develop? And this is good for both mujtahid and non-mujtahid. For the scholar of ijtihad, of usul fiqh, who can exercise ijtihad, for the legal experts, the fuqaha, the jurists, and even for the one who wants to follow the order, the rules from them, for the layman, al-amma, in the taqlid. So having good understanding of usul fiqh gives us good background about fiqh. Because without usul fiqh, we'll think that the differences in fiqh are haphazard. And inshallah, there will be 1 week by the end talking about why did we have differences among jurists. Inshallah Rabbil Alameen. So without appreciating usul fiqh, without having a general knowledge about usul fiqh, we cannot rationalize, we cannot understand the differences in the fiqh. We cannot understand even the development in the fiqh itself. So all of this is from the objectives of usul al-fiqh. Now let's move to the next characteristics of usul al-fiqh. We just brought 3 characteristics. Number 1, hermeneutic. What does hermeneutics mean? Hermeneutics means to engage with the text as opposed to intuition or customs. Hermeneutics means the interpretation will be done solely through Arabic language, because it is the language of the text. And it addresses the word meaning nexus, the relationship between the word and between its meanings. There is a relationship between the words and the meanings. This word means this. That word means that. This relationship, or what is called the nexus, word meaning nexus, this is needed. It's not up to me to interpret khimar the way I want. Some people say women are not mandated, Muslim women are not mandated to cover their hair. Why? Because there is no ayah that talks about this. What about the ayah? وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ? Let them draw down their khimar so that to cover the upper part of their clothes. No, it doesn't mean khimar. It doesn't mean hair cover. What does it mean? So khimar means the hair cover because of this and this and this and this. So you establish the relationship between this word and this meaning based on observing the word meaning relationship. That's one point. And of course, hermeneutic means it must be holistic. We need to requires exhaustive and intertextual engagement, meaning that it's not good enough to just to look at the ayah. Did you look at other evidences? Did you consult Arabic dictionaries? Did you consult the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? So we need to have this exhaustive effort in order to understand the text so that we can derive this rule. So hermeneutic is one of the characteristics of usul al-fiqh. Another feature is that it is exoteric. Actually, there is a paper written by Dr. Bernard Wise about this subject. This is contrary to the hidden knowledge, esoteric, and ishari. Exoteric means it is open and it is accessible to everyone. That's why when you ask someone giving us certain rule, what is your evidence? They should give us the evidence. There is no hidden knowledge. The evidence must be shown to people. Not only this, actually. After giving the evidence, they have to answer another question. how did they reach to this answer from this evidence, which they call وجه الاستدلال. In tafsir or in usul fiqh or in the fiqh, they'll tell you ووجه الاستدلال كذا وكذا. Meaning, okay, this is the evidence, and this is the way we understood this rule from this evidence. So the mujtahid, they are actually asked, it is mandate upon them to provide us with the evidence and with the justification. Otherwise, I can tell you in any science, in any effort, any opinion I want. I can tell you, you know what, I found out that there is water in the moon. What's your evidence? There is a bay in North California called Half Moon Bay. Half Moon Bay means there is water. So there is water in the moon. But wait a minute, what's the relationship between this and between that? Tell us, how did you reach from that locality in North California that there is water in the moon? So it's not good enough to give us evidence. You have to draw to us the path. How did you reach to this? But if someone says there are signs that maybe there is water in the moon because of the soil that had been brought from the moon, had been analyzed in NASA labs, and they concluded a possibility. Now, yeah, okay, now we understand. So it's not good enough to just provide the evidence, but rather to have this known to people, to the public, so that knowledge is accessible to the public, contrary to the esoteric, which is limited to just certain clergy or certain theocracy. In Islam, we have no clergy at all. That's why at times I'm surprised when someone introduces himself as a clerk, knowing that Islam has no clergy. What do we mean by the clergy? Clergy has certain responsibilities in the church. They are the only ones who have the authority to interpret the Bible, and they are the only ones who have the authority even to conduct certain rituals, like even the marriage. In Islam, anyone can interpret the law, providing that you have to have the prerequisites. You don't have to belong to certain class. You don't have to be a part of so-called theocracy. You don't have to be part of so-called elite. Some people will tell you that tafsir is just those are secrets given to me from God. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me what's your evidence for this. It's a knowledge that I got from God. There is no place for this in usul fiqh. You gave us opinion, you have to give us the evidence, and not just the evidence, the relationship between the evidence and between the opinion. So that's what it means when we say usul fiqh is exoteric. And another third feature, it maintains spiritual connection between human and the creator. Because again, what is usul fiqh? Usul al-Fiqh is to understand the Shari'i sources. How do they lead to certain rules? And it is the foundation of fiqh, which is the knowledge of Shari'i sources derived from their evidences. So the fiqh cannot be fiqh without providing evidence. Riba is haram because Allah said so and so and so. Not because me said so and so. I have no authority whatsoever. But when we say God said so and so, we are linking people, the mukallaf, to God, not to the mujtahid, not to the book of law, not to the court, not to the judge, but rather to the creator. Yani, Wa'il Hallaq said in one of his papers, he said Muslims have continuously maintained this relationship with the creator through the fiqh by asking about the evidence. He said something we lost a long time ago in the West. So we need, that's why we are very much concerned about usul fiqh and about fiqh the way it was. the way it is meant to be, because it maintains all of this. What is the impact, if this is the value of Usul Fiqh, what is the impact of Usul Fiqh in shaping Muslim mind? I found this very interesting, written by Sheikh Muhammad Abu Zahra, rahimahullah. He wrote in his introduction to his book, Usul al-Fiqh, he said that, in general, I'm translating to my best, Usul al-Fiqh is the most notable, noble science, in the most influential in shaping Muslim mind, fiqh mind. Without Usul Fiqh, we don't have the fiqh mentality. It's the most noble science and most influential, and has the most impact in shaping the fiqh mind. Take away Usul Fiqh, take away the fiqh mind. As simple as this. You cannot be legal theorist or jurist consultant without understanding Usul al-Fiqh. I mean, I can't understand why do some people keep attacking Usul Fiqh. In any legal system, in the common law, here we have in the US, you know, when they talk about the Supreme Court, they'll tell you Sakalia belongs to this school of law, originalist, as an example. This is his legal theory. Without this, he cannot understand the law based on certain perspective. So without Usul Fiqh, you cannot have the fiqh mind. As another point, he says it provides the students with the methodologies. Why did he say methodologies? Because as we will see, different scholars followed at times different methodology, followed by the mujtahids, our imams, in deriving their fiqh, which we now inherited. So now we inherited the fiqh produced by previous imams and scholars. So understanding Usul al-Fiqh means that we understand, we have the tool through which we understand the methodology followed by the mujtahids. Without this, what did Shafi'i say? What is he talking about here? What is he talking about there? Not even Shafi'i. Another book of fiqh which is a little bit easier than the Why did the jurist say this and why did he say that? He said this and he said that because they followed certain methodology. Led them to this with the characteristics which we talked about previously. He said the example of Usul al-Fiqh to the fiqh is like the example of logic to all philosophical sciences. When we talk about philosophy, without logic there can be no philosophy. Without Usul Fiqh there can be no fiqh. The subject matter of Usul Fiqh is everything related to the methodology of or criteria of the jurists followed to derive rules from its sources without deviating from their path. Yani, through Usul al-Fiqh we have we know now the fuqaha followed certain methodologies in order to derive certain rules, and this is what assures us that we will not deviate from the right path. And he says it provides us a criteria for the correct deduction of rules from their sources. It's like a grammar to the language, as simple as this. Without Arabic grammar, there is no Arabic language. Without Usul Fiqh, there is no fiqh. So actually, Usul Fiqh, we can see that it creates consistency. You have fiqh, you have Shari'i sources, you have fiqh, and you have in between Usul al-Fiqh. So Usul al-Fiqh understand the Shari'i sources to make sure that the end product is what is meant by Sharia. So now you have this consistency. And it is dynamic, and to appreciate the dynamism of Usul al-Fiqh, we need to understand Usul al-Fiqh. Let me just give you one example now. General example. I'll try to explain it as much as I can. We know that in Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam signed an agreement for 10 years. Right? what does 10-year mean? Three major understandings among the jurists. You have Imam Shafi'i tells us, wait a minute, 10 years, it means that any treaty cannot go beyond than 10 years. So he took it, meant it to be as it was said. Other jurists said, no, it just means that the treaty must have term limit. So it can be 10, it can be 5, it can be 15. But timing it to 10 years does not mean excluding other time periods, other numbers, but rather it's just an example. For that situation, Rasulullah figured out that, okay, we need the 10 years. And this is what he mutually agreed with Quraysh. So now you have two schools. Shafi'i says must be 10 years. Others said, no, it doesn't have to be 10 years, but there must be a time limit for it. Now, those two understandings actually are related to Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh, part of Usul al-Fiqh, which is when can we understand the text of the Hadith Rasulullah in general to apply to all situations, and when can we restrict it to that particular situation. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah came and added another understanding. He tells us, look, time doesn't matter. You can agree on the treaty as long as at any time. It can be 10 years, it can be 30 years, providing that it has a stipulation that the political leader can call it off at any time. Okay, so if the political leader has the authority to call it off at certain time, if the treaty has this stipulation, even if it's not limited to certain time, that's fine. So those three understandings are based on Usul Fiqh to one situation. So it tells, and all of them exercised all of what was mentioned. Ibn Taymiyyah's point was, look, what's the objective behind the treaty? It's to regulate relationship in a state of peace. There was some war, and then you reach to certain period where you concluded a treaty. As long as the treaty serves your interest, you'll abide by it. If it started defying your interest, going against you, it will be utilized by others, as an example, then you could have called them and to call the treaty off. You have to commit to it as long as they commit also. It's mutual commitment. So now, if there is political leadership wants to adopt Imam Shafi'i's point, or wants to adopt the majority point, or wants to adopt Ibn Taymiyyah's point, they did not deviate from the path of Sharia, because Sharia sources are not meant to be static. Sharia sources are meant to be dynamic, so you can apply it to the new situation as the political leadership fits in this case. So Usul al-Fiqh has great impact in shaping the Muslim mind. This is why, if we understand Usul al-Fiqh, we'll really be very accurate. We'll say what we mean, and we mean what we say. And if we don't keep this in mind, we'll start saying things that we don't mean. And if I said something, it was said, well, this is what it means. No, I didn't mean this. What did you mean? If you didn't mean it, this is the meaning of this expression. You know, if you don't mean it, then you are incompetent. You said things that you don't mean, and what is meant is not what you said. So you must mean what you say, and you must say what you mean. That's why, you know, Imam al-Razi, Allahumma arda anhu, in his tafsir, He was talking about one incident related to the hadith report says that Ibrahim alayhi salam lied three times. Imam Razi couldn't take it. How can Ibrahim lie? So he said, someone told me, if you reject this, are you saying that the reporter is lying? He told him to say that the reporter is lying. It's much easier for me and more preferable to me than saying that the Prophet lied. The Prophet is infallible. He doesn't lie. So it can be the reporter lied and he is not infallible. It can be a reporter had mistake. It can be many other reasons. That's the way Imam Razi understood. Some people would say, no, the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad didn't mean that Ibrahim lied. What did he mean? Did he tell you that he meant this and that? Rasulullah ﷺ utiya jawami al-kalim. He was given the ability to express the meaning in the most precise words. And in another hadith he said, Ana afsahun nas. I am the most eloquent person. Yet I am from Quraysh. So if Rasulullah ﷺ said things he doesn't mean, then he is not afsahun nas. So you are willing to accuse Muhammad ﷺ of not being eloquent, of being incompetent, and you are willing to accuse Ibrahim of lying for the sake of just defending certain report. Yes, we do believe in the authority of the Sunnah, and we'll talk about the relationship between Quran and Sunnah. But at the same time, the authentic reports that are authentic in their sanad, in their chain of narration, and in their method, in their content. So Imam Razi told us this answer. When he said, someone told me this, I told him, لأن يكذب الراوي, to accuse the rawi who is not infallible, who is subject to mistakes, although we didn't experience this from him, it's better than accusing the Sahib al-Risala, the messenger. A person would say, isn't it, shouldn't we say that the hadith reporters must be trustworthy? Yes, they must be trustworthy. No reporter, no Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmad bin Hanbal, all scholars who compiled the hadith, they did not accept the report of any person knowing that this reporter is not trustworthy. But still, does it mean that he is infallible? It's not. Doesn't mean that he is infallible. There is a difference between the infallibility and between proving that he is not trustworthy. The lack of infallibility means although he is trustworthy, but this is not conclusive. He is not immune from errors or lying or confusion for one reason or another. So we see that Usul al-Fiqh is very much needed to define for us even the way we look at things. It gives us certain perspective. So we no longer look to things in a haphazard way. We no longer look to things in a very loose way, but rather we look to the things through certain lenses, which is the lenses of Usul al-Fiqh. And you'll take this quality and you'll start applying it to other aspects. In studying history and studying even politics, and studying anything. Where does Usul Fiqh fit in the Islamic culture? Islamic culture is vast, and you can divide it into different categories. I'm not saying that this paradigm or this diagram is the standard. It is just one way to look at these, how to classify and how to categorize the disciplines of the Islamic culture. Aqidah, the sources of Hukum Shar'i, Quran and Sunnah, the tools to study the sources, the application, and contemporary thought. Under the Aqidah, you have books of Tawheed, books of Ilm al-Kalam, even books of Mantiq. A person would say, well, how can you consider books of Mantiq from the Islamic culture? It is because Muslim scholars in Ilm al-Kalam wrote in Mantiq. Imam al-Ghazali wrote in Mantiq. You will tell me, oh, Imam al-Ghazali is not Salafi, he is Ash'ari. Even, what do you mean? You want to exclude Ash'ari work from the Islamic culture? If you are trying to exclude Ash'ari work from the Islamic culture, Islamic literature, from our Turath, then nothing is left. So we need to study our Turath in a critical way. We don't hold it holy, but at the same time, we don't reject it. We read it and we study it critically. So we study mantiq in a critical way. If it talks about the Burhan, and as an example, in the Qiyas, in the analogy, in the mantiq, you have two types. You have what they call it demonstration, al-Burhan. Al-Burhan and the logical analogy. The Burhan counts on conclusive premises, proven to be conclusive by ihsas, by sensory. This is taken. You have to take it. You cannot, just because it is mentioned in this book of mantiq, I will reject it. The same thing regarding tasawwuf. The literature of tasawwuf is part of the Islamic culture, is part of our Turath, is part of our heritage. Does not mean the entire tasawwuf is valid, but it does not mean at the same time the literature of tasawwuf should be thrown away, whether we agree with the author or not. I don't agree with Ibn Arabi in his Futuhat or in his Al-Fusus. I may agree also with the Sheikh Zarruq in Qawa'id al-Tasawwuf, as an example. So you agree, as an example, with some approach of Ata'ullah al-Iskandari in his Al-Hikam al-Ata'iyya. You would agree in some of his Qawa'id, and you disagree in some of his Qawa'id. But you don't agree with the intellectual Sufism. Intellectual Sufism that claims that God and us are one, وحدة الوجود. No, we don't agree with it. But its literature is there. We can't exclude it. It's there. It's in the books of tafsir, some books of tafsir, I should say, and in the books of tasawwuf. So tasawwuf is part of it. Here, the sources, ulum al-Quran, the hadith, the seerah. So this category, the third category, is the tools category. Usul al-Fiqh, Mustalah al-Hadith, Arabic language with all of its disciplines are part of the tools to understand the sources. Then it gives us the outcome, the application. Fiqh, history, political history. All of this is part of the application, either applying the fiqh or the political application. Rahimahullah, Dr. Muhammad Zaki Abdul Barr, who used to tell us in his in the master's degree, he gave us fiqh. He used to tell us that fiqh is the most noble science in the Islamic culture. Usul al-Fiqh is related to it. But he says all other disciplines, tafsir, Arabic language, hadith, all of this are not meant by themselves only. Otherwise, it will be abstract. The outcome of all of this is fiqh, which is the discipline that deals with the daily application. So the fiqh is application. So application and the outcome of all of this, history, political history, all of this fits under that. And then you have contemporary thoughts, how to look at evolution, how to look at feminism, how to look at Islamophobia, how to look at free market economy, how to look at Marxism. This fits under contemporary thought. Contemporary thought keeps the doors open to incorporate different thoughts as long as they are correct and to add it to the Islamic culture. The point here is Usul al-Fiqh is part of the tools we use to understand the sources of study which are taken from the Aqidah. So Usul al-Fiqh has a certain role and it has certain place in the Islamic culture. It's not something extra, but rather it has its value in the Islamic culture. By this, we conclude and we come to the questions and answer session, please. So, Dania,
Yeah, so I have the questions here, so we can go ahead and get through them. Before we do jump into questions, I do want to mention that the last category discussed was contemporary thought. For those who don't know, our first session was introduced by Brother Muhammad Jalal. In fact, he has a course starting this week, actually. I'll go ahead and drop the link on the chat. But Brother Muhammad Jalal is a lecturer in politics and international relations in London. So he's actually doing a course comparing Islam and liberalism if any attendees are interested. But without further ado, we'll jump right into the Q&A, inshallah.
Okay, تفضل.
Okay, so you had mentioned the position of a faqih. Can you clarify, does a faqih conduct ijtihad? And if you could also define ijtihad, please. If not, if the faqih doesn't perform ijtihad, what is the role of a faqih?
Okay, first of all, let's define ijtihad. Ijtihad is the process of studying the legal texts and derive from them certain rule. So it is a process. And the one who is exercising this is called mujtahid. So you have mujtahid and you have ijtihad. And all of them deal with the process of deriving it. You have another term, faqih. Faqih is the one who knows. So he studied books of fiqh, does not necessarily have the capability to derive rules. He might be, then he'll be also a mujtahid. So faqih can be a mujtahid. And maybe he's not a mujtahid. So if he derives rules, then he is a mujtahid and faqih. Faqih is the one who just understands the rules, and he will be able to give you an answer, like a mufti. The difference between the mufti and faqih is that the faqih will give you the answer with the evidence. The mufti most likely will give you the answer without evidence. Some books of fatwa, it gives you the evidence, but not all of them. So you have now mujtahid, you have faqih, you have the scholar of usul al-fiqh. The scholar of usul al-fiqh is the one who understands the legal theory. He does not necessarily have to be a mujtahid. Also, if he, the ijtihad is the application. You talk about engineer, you have to talk about applied engineer, or engineering and applied engineering. So the engineer is the usuli. The applied engineer is the mujtahid. The faqih is the one who takes the outcome of the mujtahid and tells us, teaches us about it. He can be a mujtahid, but not necessarily. I hope that this answered the question, please.
We have a question. What is the difference between the Shia usul and the Sunni usul?
You know, what is the difference between Shia usul and Sunni usul? When we talk about the history of writing usul al-fiqh, we will see when did the Shia usul start its documentation. It came a little bit later, much later than the usuli documentation. But I will tell you that the Sunni usul, I would say, is not the same. We have differences even within the Sunni usul. And as an example, when we have Shari'i sources, Quran and Sunnah, okay, you have qiyas. Not all Sunnah agree on qiyas. You have the Zahiri Ibn Hazm, who is from Ahl Sunnah, he doesn't accept qiyas. So the differences are even within the schools of Sunnah. So, and there are certain things everyone agree on. As an example, both Shia and Sunnah and Ibadi, they agree on Quran and Sunnah. But which Sunnah, which report is acceptable? The Sunnah people, Ahl Sunnah, they'll tell you the reports which are mentioned in certain collection of books of Hadith. Whether it came from Bukhari or Imam Muslim, whether it gets through Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and after that, as long as it has continuous chain of narrators authentic, and as long as it is authentic in contents and in the chain of narration and gets us to the Prophet ﷺ, we'll take it. Shia, are okay of two types. You have the 12 Shia Imamiyya. They'll tell you, no, we'll accept the Sunnah only if it comes through one of the 12 Imams. So they will accept any hadith as long as it comes through their channel. Imami Zaydiyya in Yemen, like Imam Shawkani, they are very much similar to Ahl Sunnah. Ibadiyya, they are very much similar to Ahl Sunnah, but they accept more, they count on Musnad al-Rabi' ibn Habib only. It's the most authentic book to them in the Sunnah. So all of them agree on these two, but they disagreed on some details. Now the Qiyas, some of them agree on this, some agree on that, like any other differences. Okay, so, but it was written a little bit later than the major books of Sunni, quote unquote Sunni Islam. And I don't like to use the term Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. We have Islam. The religion which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to us is Islam. Inna ad-deen 'inda Allah Islam. But Islam can be understood in certain aspects in different ways. In certain aspects, no. There can be no different aspect. When we talk about the oneness of Allah, when we talk about the finality of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no second room. But did Islam define a person to be Imam after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The Shia says yes. Sunnah and Ibadi says no. As an example. Now this difference does not disqualify you from being Muslim. I can argue with you in this, in your opinion. I can tell you this is wrong because this and this and this and this. And you can argue with my view and you tell me my view is wrong because this of this and this. As long as we are having the discussion in a transparent way, without partisanship, without madhabism, you know, that's fine. The problem now is not in the differences themselves per se, but rather the way some see the differences. So some Shia will see the difference in a very partisan way. No way for them to accept anything. They are willing, some of them, not all of them, even to go after some companions. So I would say the best way is to agree on basis and move forward so that to know how to handle these differences.
We have another question. تفضل.
تفضل.
Could you elaborate on why Usul al-Fiqh is more important for us, or is it the most noble science in relation to other Islamic disciplines?
Why is it more? Because what are the other Islamic disciplines? You have fiqh. To reach to fiqh, you have to have usul al-fiqh. You have hadith. Hadith is used to utilize by the mujtahid, to be utilized by the mujtahid to reach to fiqh. So hadith does not hang up in the air. I would not study hadith separate from other disciplines. Even ulum al-Quran, even tafsir, all of these disciplines are needed for one. Why do we need to understand the Quran at the end of the day? At times to appreciate the i'jaz of the Quran, if I want to carry the da'wah to non-Muslim. But at the end, I study the ayat of Al-Quran Kareem to obey, not to abandon Quran. Now, in order to obey and to implement and to extract, to reach to fiqh, we need usul al-fiqh. Go to other disciplines. Seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What do we need it for? If it's not to understand how did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam live and what parts of seerah are abiding for us and what parts of seerah are not abiding for us. Not every single thing in the seerah is binding for us, actually, I should say. We are not bound by each and every single incident in the seerah. Misunderstanding the seerah will lead to oh my God, grave consequences. Imagine some people understood that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated from Mecca to Medina, so they have to perform immigration. But that's not binding. That it happened that Mecca did not respond to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he started looking for another sources. He got to Medina. He, by de facto, he has to migrate. It's not part of the message to us. To him, he was following the orders from the Wahy. That's why Ibn Hisham said, when he permitted the Sahaba to migrate to Medina, he remained in Mecca waiting for the permission of his Lord to migrate. But to say that this is binding for us, because we did not utilize Usul al-Fiqh, we didn't understand which actions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are legal for us and which actions are not. So to understand other things in such a way that it will lead us to the fiqh, which is the most prominent discipline, we need Usul al-Fiqh. Without Usul al-Fiqh, everything will remain theoretical. That's why Sheikh Abu Zahra said it's the most noble science, because it gets us to understand the fiqh. Please, if there is any follow-up, you can follow up on the question.
We do have a few questions regarding Imam al-Shafi'i, because you had mentioned Imam al-Shafi'i was the main architect, or the one who initially started documenting or writing the principles to extract fiqh, or the Islamic rulings. So was the process of ijtihad not transparent before Imam al-Shafi'i defined usul al-fiqh? Is it not true that, for example, usul was brought by the Prophet ﷺ and developed under the Sahaba Ikram, etc.?
Yeah, okay. When we talk about the history of Usul Fiqh, we'll see how did it develop. The Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim resorted to Usul Fiqh. The same thing, let me give you another example. When we talk about Arabic language was said by Arabs before Islam, Sha'r al-Jahili, and after Islam. But which language is binding for us? Which constitutes rules for Arabic language that is binding? It is a certain period of time, the Jahili time before Islam and till the 2nd century of Hijrah. During that period of time, there was no documentation for Arabic language. The first book was documented, as an example, when Sibawayh came and documented the grammar, and Khalil ibn Ahmad documented Arabic dictionary. They are in the 2nd century. Before that, the rules were there. They just came and put it in writing. So we cannot say that before putting it in writing that it was not transparent. It was there. Same thing when we talk about Usul Fiqh. We'll see how did the Sahaba understood the text and how did they utilize Usul Fiqh and the Tabi'in in the history of Usul Fiqh. But now it's enough to say that Usul Fiqh was exercised. And maybe some parts of it were written here and there, but it was Shafi'i who started writing it in more organized way, systematic way. So Shafi'i did not invent usul. He just put it in writing. It's like Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad, when he wrote the first Arabic dictionary, he did not, and underline the word not, he did not invent the meanings for this word and that word and this word and that word. This word meaning relationship was not invented by Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad. He just listened to Arabs and documented the meanings, and then he put it in an organized way in a form of dictionary. So Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad did not invent the meanings, but rather he just documented them. Imam al-Shafi'i did not invent the usul, rather he documented it. Same thing also in Arabic poetry. Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad had another contribution in Arabic poetry. He listened to Arabic poetry and he noticed that we can divide them into different, what they call it, meters. He classified them into 17 meters. He did not invent them. So Arabic poetry had been established even before Islam. so many poets before Islam and after Islam, and used to recite poetry following one of these 17 meters. So Khalil ibn Ahmad just noticed them and he classified them into those 17 meters. He did not invent them. Same thing again applies to Usul Fiqh. Shafi'i did not invent Usul, he just documented them. So it is transparent, and they used, we'll see that there was debate even among the Sahaba in certain issues of Usul at that time, during their time. So that I would say the answer for this.
There is a question, what is the evidence to say that only a government can implement societal laws or ahkam?
When Usul al-Fiqh, when ulama al-Usul talked about the, first of all, how to understand the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, they said the actions are divided into different categories. One of them is private for him. Okay, that's, we are not asked to do it by us, but rather it's special for him. Another actions are ibadah. Another actions are bayan. So we are asked to follow this, the bayan. Then comes what Qarafi said. He said he carried out those actions which are bayan in different capacities. So there are actions carried out by being a judge. So only a judge can issue a verdict in an enforcing way. Another actions, Imam, like we said, Imam al-Qurtubi, he talks about, he said by definition this requires a leader. Why? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَسَارِقُ وَسَارِقُ فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. Okay, cut the hand of the thief. Imagine every person will jump to a person saying that he committed a theft, so I want to cut his hand or her hand. Imagine how the situation will be. You must have a political leadership. You don't need a text from Quran and Sunnah telling us that you as a community, you must have a leader. Even Arabic poetry talked about this. لا يصلح الناس فوضى لا صراط لهم. People will not function in a haphazard without leaders for them. ولا صراط إذا جهالهم سادوا, like today. And there will be no leaders if the ignorants are the ones who dominated. So you have to have leader. And if you strip the leader of the authority designated to the leader, then what do we need the leader for? If I can do it on my own and you cannot do it on your own, I saw someone committed a theft crime, or I thought that he committed a theft crime, then I will go and cut the hand. You saw someone, you thought that they committed zina, you start lashing them. It is going to be a chaos. But the judge will look at it. This theft, did it meet the criteria for applying the rule or not? So the judge will look at all evidences, study the situation, so that the judge will issue the verdict. The same thing applies to all other rules. Now the judge cannot be a judge unless if the judge is appointed by the political leadership. We cannot, as an example, in any place, some people in certain state, in Dallas, in Texas, in California, will say, yeah, we want to have our tribunal, we want to have our court, and our court will start applying the laws. Who gave you the power? Who gave you the power? If in the zakah, one of the categories that are allowed to receive zakah, al-amiluna alayha, the ones who are collecting the zakah. But can I establish organization telling you, give me your zakah, I will collect it and I will take 1/8 of it, because I'm amil alayha. Who appointed you as a zakah collector? You cannot be self-appointee. You cannot be self-judge, appointed judge. You must have the authority to be appointed as a judge in order to see a case in a court session. Subhanallah, the jurist told us, if the judge saw something in certain case not in the court session, he cannot issue a verdict based on his own private information. All evidences must be submitted and administrated in a court session. A court cannot be a court without being appointed by the political leader, by the Khalifa. So if we take this from on our own, there will be no system at all, and we'll end up applying non-Islamic rules, thinking that we are applying Islamic rules. So that's why you have it's the state, it's the political leadership that carries the responsibility of executing the law. We carry the responsibility of executing some parts of the law that are related to us. I don't need a state to tell me establish the salah, or pay the zakat, or fast Ramadan, or observe the dress code, or stay away from riba, or conduct the marriage in this way. I don't need a state. But the other aspects, they do need a state.
This is a quick and easy one, just to define some terms. You had mentioned al-Burhan, you had mentioned Ash'ari. Could you define those two terms?
Okay. Al-Burhan is a term used in logic to talk about, to tell us about demonstration, which is the conclusive evidence. So if you have one premises and another premises and then conclusion, if those two premises are conclusive and you establish their authenticity and correctness by sensory sensation, then this is Burhan, the conclusive evidence. Okay? Is there any follow-up on this before I move to the Ash'ari? Okay. The Ash'ari, Muslims in the past, after the fitna of Uthman and Ali, Allahumma arda anhum, and the assassination of both, there was fighting amongst Muslims. It ended up in dividing Muslims into three political groups: the Shia, who claim that they are supporting Ali ibn Abi Talib, Allahumma arda an, karramallahu wajhah, and the Ahl Sunnah remained alone, and the Khawarij, who revolted against Ali for some reason, because he accepted the arbitration. Now, at the beginning, the difference was political, but later on turned to be intellectual. That's one point. So now we started getting divided into intellectual groups. Later on, when the Umayyads came, Umayyads started saying that the ruler is Qadarullah. You cannot object the ruler because he is appointed by God. God appointed him. So you have to accept him because this is Qadarullah. This is fatalism. I call it al-Jabriya siyasiyya, political fatalism. When it started emerging, and start appearing, Al-Hasan al-Basri, one of the Tabi'in, fought against it strongly. And Al-Mu'tazila came also opposing this fatalism. But until that time, there was no translation from the Greek philosophy. The translation from the Greek philosophy came at the end of the Umayyad period. When the Abbasis came, the Abbasis started saying that the Khalifa is God's shade on the earth. You have to obey. Ana Sultanullah. Contrary to what Abu Bakr called himself, Khalifat Rasulillah. He's not Khalifatullah. He is Khalifat Rasulillah, the one who succeeded the Prophet. But now to say, I am the Sultan of God. This is big shift in how to understand politics and the role of the Khalifa in the society. In the early days, Muslims يعني there was a governor sent by Umar ibn Khattab Bilad al-Sham. He told them to Iraq. He told them, I am here to serve you. I am ready to clean the road for you. Compare this with what Umar ibn Hubayra was appointed by some Umayyads when he talked to Al-Hasan al-Basri. He told him, God appointed Yazid ibn Abd al-Malik. And Yazid ibn Abd al-Malik appointed me. So whatever I'm doing it because Yazid, who is appointed by God, wants me to do. Compare this with the governor who was appointed by Umar ibn Khattab. So since then, now we started divided into Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila started becoming philosophical and started talking about some attributes of God and claimed that Quran is created. So people responded to them. So from then you have the Mu'tazila, you have al-Jabriya, you have al-Asha'ira. Abu al-Hasan Ash'ari was Mu'tazili, split from them and established his own theology. Now there is debate whether the theology of al-Ash'ari is the theology of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah or not. The Salafis say no, the Ash'ari say yes. This debate will never reach to an end. But I would say whether it is Salafi or Ash'ari, you look at the statement. If it is correct, then you will take it. If it's not correct, you don't take it. So the Ash'ari emerged at that time. In reference to Abu al-Hasan Ash'ari, who was Mu'tazila and split from them, promoting his understanding regarding the attributes of God, regarding the createdness of Quran, regarding all other theological differences.
So we do have a few questions regarding ijtihad and comparing it to a few different things. So I'll lump them up. One is, what is the difference between ijtihad and istidlal? And what is the difference between ijtihad and qiyas?
What is the difference between ijtihad and qiyas first? Qiyas is one of the sources. We say Shari'i sources, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. Utilizing Qiyas is the ijtihad. Is this clear? You can text to the yes or no, please. So Qiyas is a source. Ijtihad is the process of utilizing Qiyas, Quran and Sunnah and Ijma'. Istidlal is very much similar to the ijtihad. How to derive rules, how to have this inference from this rule, from this text to this rule. So you would say istidlal is more particular case by case, ijtihad is the whole process as well. I hope that this answered the question.
Okay, so we do have, I couldn't understand the difference between adilla tafsiliya and adilla ajmaliyya. If you could briefly just read.
We say that the Shari'i sources are Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. So these are adilla ijmaliyya. Each one of them, each source, Quran, has so many ayat. Each one of them is dalil tafsili, adilla tafsiliyya, detailed evidence. So the detailed evidences refer to the adilla ijmaliyya. So the dalil ijmali is the general source and dalil tafsili is the detailed source. Like I said, an example. For us, the faqih, we have certain source. We cannot take from any other source. Like a water, you have to take water from certain spring. This spring is the only source for Sharia, for water, for sources of Sharia. So all of it as whole is dalil ijmali, the wahi, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. But certain cup or glass full of that water from that spring is the dalil tafsili. So you look to the ayah wa aqimu as-salah. This ayah, is it from Quran or not? Yes, it is from Quran. So being from Quran, it means it is from the dalil ijmali, the collective or the general evidence or the source. Being particular of ayah, or part of ayah even, then it tells us certain hukum shar'i, because there is no ayah says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. This is part of ayah. This is part of ayah, as you know. مثلا in first Surah Al-Baqarah, الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة. Those who believed in the ghaib and they established the prayer. So this statement ويقيمون الصلاة, which is part of ayah, is the dalil tafsili, the detailed evidence fuqaha used to tell us that salah is a must. But it is taken from the spring, the Quran. So it is taken from the general evidence, from dalil ijmali. I hope that it answered the question. Please, you can text Sister Dania if you got the answer or not.
So there is one more follow-up on the Mufti Faqih question, which is, why would a Mufti give a ruling without evidence as opposed to Faqih with evidence?
Why the Mufti wouldn't, it's not always. There are so many Muftis give us the hukum with the evidence. If they give us the hukum with the evidence, then it will be also Faqih. He can be Faqih, even if he didn't give us the evidence, but we didn't benefit from. For us, it's not Fiqh, it's just the fatwa. Fatwa is the snapshot that he gave us related to this question. Okay, he can give us, okay, I asked him, okay, today before I left home, I shook hands with my wife, but I have wudu. Should I make wudu again or not? He'll tell me, don't make wudu. Another Mufti will tell me, no, make wudu, because you are Shafi'i. All of them didn't provide us with the evidence. Third person comes and tells us, you need to make wudu because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ. Another person move to another level because he said, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ, and it just means touching, doesn't mean intimacy, as an example. So fiqh is at different levels too. But if it is without any evidence, it means just fatwa. Direct fatwa. All what I care about, I don't. Some people will tell the person whom they ask, you know what, I don't care about the evidence. I don't understand the evidence. I just want to ask, do it or don't do it. This level is the fatwa. Higher than this, to give the answer with the evidence. Higher than this, to give the answer with evidence, and how did they reach to this answer. So it's not just one static, quote unquote categories. It has many levels and layers in between.
This one's a little bit longer, but so we observe that almost all mujtahids have been men. A man can understand a man in a better way. Similarly, a woman can understand a woman in a better way. But we do not see any prominent women in the field of ijtihad in our history. How has this fact impacted the Sharia rulings, especially fiqh, about women's issues in family life?
Okay, the first statement, man can understand man in a better way, and woman can understand woman in a better way. But God is not man, neither God is woman. God is God. And God has no gender bias. So both men and women can understand God, as long as they are equipped with it. This is one side. The other point, actually, we have Muslim jurists, women Muslim jurists. We have Muslim women who are scholars of hadith. We have Muslim women who are scholars of fiqh. We have Muslim women who even perform tafsir. But the engagement was not as the engagement of quote unquote men. The question which matters is those people, the scholars of tafsir or the scholars of fiqh, the paradigm which they have, do they have feminine or masculine paradigm? That's the question. They don't. The paradigm which they have, the criteria which they have is well explained, like we said, exoteric. It is open to people. Ask the evidence. They are asked they are mandated to provide you with the evidence and the way the way they derived rule from that. So there is no masculine epistemology. There should be no masculine in tafsir. There should be no feminine tafsir. That's the way I look at it. So let's not think that only man can understand man and only woman can understand woman, because now we are not talking about man-made system. Furthermore, at times, Umar ibn Khattab wanted to do something, and when he didn't have an answer, he asked his daughter Hafsa, one of the mothers of our mothers, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. She suggested him certain approach, and he was open. He didn't act as patriarchal person. He acted as imam, carrying the responsibility of talking to people in this way, ruling to people by Quran and Sunnah. So, but can there be mistakes? Yes, there can be mistakes. Always there can be mistakes. But those mistakes, for what reason? We need to understand for what reason. Is it for because of this or because of that? In order to avoid that's why we said in the Usul Fiqh, one reason why we need it does not just guide the mujtahid to derive rule, but also it provides us with tools to evaluate the ijtihad. So are we evaluating ijtihad properly? Is the faqih or the faqihah willing to engage into a discussion and telling us this is because of this and this is because of that? As long as the process is transparent, as holistic and exoteric, and no one will tell you, why are you asking me a question? Who are you to ask me a question? I am a scholar. Go and read and study so that you qualify to ask me a question. Some people, unfortunately, are answering in this way. This is not the right way to answer. The open dialogue and the transparent dialogue, candid discussion is the answer, to avoid any biases by this mujtahid or by that mujtahid. Let the mujtahid be a male or let him be a female. But by the way, in the Hanafi jurist, the most important book in the Hanafi fiqh, Bada'i al-Sana'i'. Bada'i al-Sana'i', the author checked it with his wife. His wife was a jurist too. We have in London, Dr. What's his name? Akram al-Nadawi. Akram al-Nadawi, he wrote a great book of Muhaddithat, and now he is writing writing it in a larger scale. I'm not sure how many volumes it is now. But just look at the book, the small book of Muhaddithat. How many scholars of hadith from among women? How many scholars of hadith got their ijaza from women? How many women, the one who built Al-Qayrawan, a woman built it to be an educational center. So Muslim women were not excluded, but the contribution maybe it's not as obvious as we think. But in the hadith, I'm very much sure that it's beyond any imagination. Dr. Akram al-Nadawi says the number reaches to thousands.
All right, before I take more questions, I do want to let the attendees know that you don't see it right now, but inshallah, we do have a list of all the questions saved, and we are planning to have what you might call office hours, at least, coming forward, inshallah. So be on the lookout for that, so we can also just spend a full session addressing questions. We do have 15 minutes. We'll take a few more.
Any question?
So going back to the difference between ijtihad and istidlal, could you give an example that would show the difference?
No, the ijtihad is the entire process. The istidlal, as an example, when a jurist tells you أو لامستم النساء, it means touching your wife, not just having intimacy, because the word lamasa in Arabic language means to touch. It only means intimacy as a metaphor, and you cannot go to the metaphor unless if you cannot apply the literal meaning. This is istidlal. What's this? Who's typing on? Okay.
There is a recommendation. What is the most comprehensive book on comparative usul al-fiqh?
Oh, comparative usul fiqh. You know, when we talk about the methods or the development of usul literature, we'll talk about this, inshallah. The problem is most of these books are in Arabic. That's why I said studying Arabic language can never be overestimated, and it should not be underestimated. Okay. So inshallah, we'll go through some names of books then by them.
Inshallah. You know, on one of the slides, you had shown a difference, different Islamic disciplines, sciences, and your own sort of categorization. It was one more before this, actually.
Okay.
But in any case, the question was, where does the concept of urf fit into this model, and will urf be covered at some point later in this class?
Okay, the urf. Okay, let me ask a question. Where does the qiyas come here in this paradigm, in this diagram? As an example, qiyas or urf, when to utilize it as part of usul al-fiqh. When the urf can be authority, when the urf cannot be. It's part of usul al-fiqh. So it's not the urf by itself, which is part of the Islamic culture. The literature documented the urf is part of the Islamic culture, which is actually fits under usul fiqh, one of the topics of usul fiqh. Okay. Any other question, please?
There is one here. I would add to the question of female perspective being required in usul that it is necessary to first identify instances of gender bias, which I personally haven't heard of, given that everything in Islamic law uplifts women and upholds their respect in society. It's more of a comment.
Is it comment or question?
Sorry, it was a comment.
Okay.
A welcome one for sure. There is a question you meant in this model. What does tasawwuf mean?
Tasawwuf, it is the discipline, the science that relates to certain theories. Some at times it is intellectual, like believing in the oneness of the everything, the wahdat al-wujud, or just the tazkiyatun nafs. But both have different books written by mutasawwifin and by others. And when we have Madarij al-Salikin by Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, it fits under the tasawwuf books. When we have Qawa'id al-Tasawwuf by Imam bin Zarruq, Shaykh bin Zarruq, it fits under tasawwuf. Tasawwuf includes things which are accepted and things which are rejected. The things which are rejected, anything goes against Quran and Sunnah. But if you talk about tasawwuf in the sense of tazkiyatun nafs, purifying the soul, okay, then that's fine. It is accepted. If you talk about tasawwuf, it means that you have to be in the hands of your shaykh, like the deceased one in the hands of the washers. No, that's not accepted. So it has both.
So it looks like we're finishing up. Okay, there's one more. Is the mujtahid the highest position of authority, or is it mufassir, or do both enjoy equal status?
Actually, the mufassir's job is just to explain the meanings of the ayat. But even the mufassir comes at different levels. The mufassir can be a mujtahid, like Imam al-Qurtubi. He wrote Ahkam al-Quran, Tafsir Ahkam al-Quran. He is a jurist and he is a mufassir, mujtahid and mufassir. At times the mufassir cannot be a jurist, just focuses on the meanings of the language. Imam Ibn Kathir, he has books in hadith, he has books in tafsir, he has books in seerah. I'm not aware of any book that he wrote in fiqh. So not every mufassir is a mujtahid or faqih. But the mujtahid, to perform ijtihad, they need to understand the tafsir of the ayahs which are related to the subject. They don't have to write book of tafsir. But if they want to use certain ayah, refer to certain ayah, they must exhaustively understand the tafsir of the ayah. So tafsir is involved in ijtihad. But again, mujtahid does not have to be a mufassir. They must understand the tafsir related to the subject matter. Can be like again al-Qurtubi, he was a mujtahid and a mufassir. Ibn al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, he was a mujtahid and mufassir. Okay, but not every mufassir necessarily have the capability of ijtihad.
Okay. Someone wants just a validation to make sure they've understood correctly. But usul al-fiqh is a very rational outcome of the understanding of the Sahaba. If I've understood correctly, please elaborate.
Is the rational understanding of the Sahaba?
Correct.
Like I mentioned, the sources of usul al-fiqh are many. One of which Arabic language. The Sahaba's language was Arabic by nature, not like our language. Their language is authority by itself. When they say something, they said a grammar. The rules of grammar are taken from Arabic poetry before Islam, even till Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i language, by the way, is authority in Arabic language. There was a person asked, do you accept the report of Shafi'i language? He told him, Shafi'i's language is authority. It's not his report. So the language was the Arabic language was the language of Sahaba. Sahaba also witnessed the revelation and witnessed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did he apply the general and the particular? So they developed this ability in a natural and organic way and moved it to the tabi'in and so on. And then the documentation came. So this is how and we'll talk inshallah about this in more details in the history of usul fiqh, I think next week.
Inshallah. How are rulings derived with issues related to these contemporary issues on the far right of the slide, contemporary Islam, like feminism, Islamophobia, etc., because these issues never existed before?
Now, the right side of the screen, evolution, Islamophobia, feminism, etc., they don't necessarily need fiqh engagement. They need from us to understand, as an example, Islamic point of view towards evolution, Islamic point of view towards feminism. Does Islam set barrier between man and woman? Does Islam give inferiority or superiority to this over that? That's what we need. So it can be from what is called ثقافة إسلامية, Islamic culture. Does not necessarily, maybe part of it is related to fiqh. Maybe part of it is related to hadith. How to develop these views. So it's more than just fiqh or hadith. It's more intellectual issues that we need to see how to look at them and how to evaluate them.
In a few sentences, could you just briefly define ibadi? Because you've mentioned Sunni and ibadi.
Yeah, ibadi. Yeah, okay. After the unfortunate incident that happened between the fighting, actually, not incident, between Ali and Muawiyah, it ended up in assassinating Ali ibn Abi Talib, Allahumma arda anhu. Before he was assassinated, he accepted the arbitration. There was a split in his camp. Some people rejected the arbitration that was suggested by Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased from all of them. So after the split, Ali ibn Abi Talib has to fought in two fronts. He has to engage those who rebelled against him and those who were with Muawiyah. Now, those who went against him of different levels. Now, you have the Abadi say, we just rejected the arbitration, but we are not promoting the Khawarij view, because the Khawarij view of different groups, there are different groups. They'll tell you those extreme groups came after us. So I'm not talking about the extreme groups of Khawarij, those who went to the takfir or this or that. No, that's not that. Ibadi is a fiqhi school of fiqh, and the Abadis live now in Oman, in parts of Libya, and in Algeria, and maybe in Zanzibar in the south. So I don't see difference in these issues more than the differences in the fiqh of Abu Hanifa and fiqh al-Shafi'i. For the Aqidah, some people say they adopted the Mu'tazila in one aspect, not in all of it. But again, when we talk about these groups and these schools, we shouldn't discuss them associated with certain label. I'm against labeling. Muslims keep complaining about labeling, about stereotyping, about character assassination. We should stay away from this. If the Ibadis said something right, I'll take it. If the Mu'tazila said something right, I'll take it. If Abu Hassan Ash'ari said something right, I'll take it. If Imam Shaykh al-Islam bin Taymiyyah said something right, I will take it. Or Ibn al-Qayyim. So we shouldn't take the opinion based on certain level, based on its level. We should take the opinion based on the soundness and the correctness of the dalil utilized by these people. So the Abadis are referring to this group. Oman, Libya, part of Algeria, part of Zanzibar. They have very rich literature in fiqh, by the way, and some other things. But again, the problem is that they are labeled that they are Khawarij. They deny completely that they are Khawarij. They said the As-Sufriya and all other Khawarij groups, he said they split from us. And we don't agree with them. They even say that the one who killed Ali ibn Abi Talib is not from them. They deny that he is from Ibadi. There is big discussion about this. Okay? Because that time different groups came, each one of them claimed certain thing.
Okay, inshallah. So we're at time, inshallah. We have gone through the vast majority of questions. And again, I'll reiterate, we will have office hours to answer a Q&A going forward, inshallah. So barakallahu feekum for joining us, inshallah. And we'll see everybody next week to begin discussing the history of Usul al-Fiqh.
Next week, we'll have this. History of Usul al-Fiqh. Okay, so we'll discuss the era of the Prophet, the companions, and that again. How did it develop? How did Usul al-Fiqh emerge? Inshallah. Anything else?
That should be it, inshallah. See everybody next week. Yallah. Assalamu alaikum.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك لا اله الا انت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب اليك والعصر ان الانسان لفي خسر الا الذين امنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.